AMTS.cattle.pro is a powerful tool for nutritionists to precision feed cattle. To maximize the power of the program, inputs should be as precise as possible. However, for a busy nutritionist with many farms, keying all the inputs can take time. We have built into the program many time-saving features such as environmental templates, ration output templates, and the ability to copy and paste like information as much as possible. In addition to our built-in features, there are shortcuts you as a nutritionist can employ to make ration balancing faster. A big time saver that I'm going to demonstrate today uses the power of the personal feed bank to set up quick rations that are then personalized to fit the specific farm. To demonstrate this, I'm going to start with a farm that I've already partially created. You could use a farm that you are comfortable with the rations in, that you're confident that they are good rations, or you could start fresh. The things that are important on this first screen in order to be quick is the dairy name, which will be by default whatever you name it when you start, the net milk price, and the net animal value. These values are each needed in order to compute a least cost ration. After the farm is created, the first screen to go to is locations. In this case, I already have a location created. I'm going to check my activity calculator for that red barn. I'm using the freestyle calculations. I can input the number of animals and the stocking and how many times a day, all these lengths, which will then translate into the calculated distance walked, and then I can transfer that quickly over. I'm checking my temperature inputs. I'm keeping it at thermal neutral, which is what these inputs are indicating. Please note the Environmental Templates tab. This can be employed as a shortcut to apply the appropriate environmental conditions to an animal. I will demonstrate at another time the use of that tab. So I'm just going to set up one location in this farm. Then we'll go to the cattle screen. I don't have any cattle group. The first thing I'm going to do is set up an 80-pound cow. Then it's important to adjust these default inputs for a lactating dairy cow. I'm going to make her 42 months old and 150 days since calving, 50 days pregnant. I'm going to check my calf birth weight and knock that down a few pounds. And I have her giving 80 pounds of milk. You'll see why I'm specifying 80 pounds of milk shortly. I'm checking my mean full body weight. I'm going to make these girls a little bit lighter. I'm going to keep my mature full body weight at that pounds. And then this is a shortcut that we have. The average daily gain calculator for the 80-pound cow indicates that in order for her to reach 1650 by 60 months of age, her mature weight, then she should be gaining half a pound a day. So we're going to incorporate that into our calculations. With that first cow group created, we're going to copy and then we're going to paste. We're going to call this an 85. And the only thing we need to change, because we already set it up, making her an 85-pound group. Again, we're going to copy and paste. So as you see, you can use whatever increments of milk production that you would like. I've set up 5 different groups with 5 pounds between them, and it can go on up through. This gives you an easy template from which you can build up other cow groups. If you want to group them by lactation number, you can create an 80-pound cow that is only 30 months of age. You can change all of these parameters really quickly using the copy cattle group and then paste. This is a quick way to quickly populate your farm. So after we have gotten as many cow groups as we want to use, we'll go to feeds. And in this farm, I already have some feeds populated into my farm feed bank that are farm feeds that I traditionally use. As a nutritionist, I'm sure that you have feeds that you routinely use. You can create a feed bank that contains regional feeds. There are many other things that you can do with the My Feed Banks, which I'll demonstrate after we do a few rations. So these are the feeds that I wanted in this particular farm to formulate the ration that I'm going to do. Importantly, I've put the price per ton down here when I created this. So going to recipes, we have no recipes present. I'm going to go to the manage recipes. I'm going to create a recipe for the 80-pound cow. And in this case, all of the feeds in my farm are there, and I can transfer them all quickly over. Then I just have to put in the quantities that I want to start my recipe with. Okay, after you've put all of the some rough ingredient amounts in, you can go ahead and start to set up your optimizer. Now, sometimes it's easy to set it up in this optimizer feed constraint page. I like to work on the ration page. So I go down through and I set up my minimum and maximum inclusion values for each feed. Quite often with forages, you're working in terms of inventories. So you will need to include a minimum amount to make sure that that gets included. They're an on-farm resource, and most of the time they're always included in a ration. But some of the purchased ingredients, you may only want to put a maximum value of inclusion on. When you get to something like ingredients like salt or minerals, and you know the specific inclusion that you want to have in that recipe, you can lock those values down rather tightly. Or if it's an expensive ingredient that you know that you want to use, you can also lock that in the minimum and maximum values. That means it will be included whether the least cost optimizer wants to include it on that amount or not. Okay, once you have all the minimum and maximum values set up in your feed constraints, you can move over to the output constraints, and you need to set up the minimum and maximum values there. You can choose over here, the check marks will indicate whether it's in the optimizer or not. And this list of outputs can be quite extensive. That too can be narrowed down. We'll do that in a follow-up video showing how to employ ration output templates. But in this video, we're just going to cover, we're not going to cover that specific item. So you want to set up certain things in the optimizer. I'm going to include forage NDF as a percent of body weight. And I'm setting a minimum and maximum value that I want the ration to fall between. Dry matter intake is automatically included. This must be constrained fairly tightly. So in order to do that, I take my clues from the predicted dry matter intake over here, the CNCPS value, and the predicted dry matter intake according to the NRC, and you can fall somewhere in between those. This particular ration that I put together is around 54 pounds, so that's where I'm going to set my maximum. And then my minimum, I'm going to have that very closely constrained, so I'm going to do that within 0.2 of a pound. My ME, I want at 103. We're going to open this up a little bit to begin with, so the optimizer has some room, some wiggle room. The PENDF, I want around 26. And then even though we need to become accustomed to not thinking about rations in terms of crude protein, it's often a good measure, and it's what farmers are used to assessing. So I usually put the crude protein in the optimizer to make sure that I stay within a fairly good range. So after I've set my constraints, I'm going to run the optimizer. and that brings back an answer. Then I look at where my milk is and um, where my feed falls out. And if I like that ration, I can go with it, or I might tighten this up a little bit. In terms of whether this ration meets your needs or not, what you really need to consider is that the optimizer will help you get to the place that you want to be, but you shouldn't expect that it's going to feed the cows for you. You still need to be a good nutritionist, and you still need to be able to um, come up with some rations, some guidelines from which the optimizer can then formulate its guidelines. So once you've formulated your 80-pound cow recipe to a degree where you're meeting most of the requirements, this could certainly be moved a little bit, but I just want to move on to the next thing. You can then use this base recipe and feed it to your other animals. So if you go to the Manage Recipe, there's a couple options. You can feed this recipe to any of the groups given. Now, in doing the feed this recipe to, you're maintaining a link between this recipe that you're creating and the recipe that you're going to feed to another cow group. This would be as if you put a load of feed on a wagon and you dumped some in one pen and then you dumped more in another pen based on how much dry matter intake that they're predicted to take. An alternative to this, and what we're going to demonstrate today because we want to create a series of rations, is you're copying this recipe and you're feeding it to another group. So in this case, we're going to call it the 85-pound cow. And we took that same recipe and we fed it to an 85-pound cow. Now the dry matter predicted intake, we're going to adjust that, and then we can see how it meets the requirements over here. This could also be optimized, and it doesn't make any changes to the recipe. Right now it's in all the same proportions that it was for that 80-pound cow. But if you wanted to optimize, you set up your feed constraints in this cow group, because remember, you only had your output constraints set up in the other group. So we're going to set it up in a similar fashion. So after you've set up your optimizer outputs, your ration outputs that you want included in the optimizer, you can go ahead and run the optimizer on this one, and then you get back a solution. And after you've run this optimizer, you can also, in order to balance this more precisely, you could bring in more feeds using your active feed banks. You can add to the ration so that you can plump this up. So once you've done that, we'll go to the next step of what we're going to do. So once you have optimized this and you have it in the range that you would like to see, certainly this could be worked with a little bit more, but we'll move on to the next step of this. You take your composites, you go up to Manage Composites, Create, and you're going to create a composite from the feeds in this group. And as you can see, what that does is it creates a feed, and that it creates a mix that then is in our farm feed bank, which will be important for the next step. We're going to go back to the recipe on the 80-pound cow, and we're going to do the same thing. So if we go back to feeds, we can see that we have an 85-pound mix and an 80-pound cow mix. So going to my feed banks, we then want to create a feed bank. So if we go to my feed bank, we're going to create a feed bank called Lactating Recipes. And we'll click OK. And that adds to, if we have our lactating recipes, we go to that feed bank, And if we go over here and we go to our farm, we can then send the 80-pound recipe and the 85-pound recipe over into our lactating recipes. What that does for us is that if we create a new farm, and we're just going to call this Lodi Farm, and in Lodi Farm, we would of course fill in the milk price, and we would put in our net animal value, and then we have to create a location. We're going to call this Blue Barn. And we're going with our default values on that. We're going to create a mid cattle group, and we're going to make her an 85-pound cow. We'll set up the parameters. These are all going, I'm just putting these in quickly as a similar type parameters to that animal that we set up in our other farm. Okay, after we've set up our animals similarly, we can go to our feeds. And we're going to bring in the same sort of feeds into our farm, or we can bring our mixes into our farm from our lactating recipes feed bank. Then we go to recipes, and we're going to create a recipe. We say OK, and our farm feeds, we can just send over these feeds and decompose them. And then we have all of these same feeds in that farm, and we can easily start playing around in this recipe. And if we go back to the feeds, we can see that we now have those broken out in terms of those recipes there with the same pricing, so that if you need to change the prices on this particular farm, you can change them in the feed bank over here. If you need to change the quantities or add some different feeds or take away some feeds, you can manage that from here, but you're able to quickly populate that farm with feeds that you routinely use, and then you can start working right from this ration to balance it. Okay, so that is a quick demonstration of one method that you can use to speed along creating a new farm. We will be creating others in this series and look forward to them. Thanks very much.